Are we live? You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Gary Jewell is an ordained pastor in the Mennonite Church USA. He grew up in the Presbyterian Church, but in his early adulthood found his denominational home within the Anabaptist tradition of the Mennonites. He went to seminary in Elkhart, Indiana at the Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary from 1988 to 93. He has served in a congregational ministry in the Pacific Northwest for 32 years. He serves as district pastor for the Pacific Northwest Mennonite Conference, and he lives in Spokane with his wife, Jan. So welcome.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I'm just really kind of honored that I'm being asked to share about Mennonites and how they may look at the subject of death and dying. But to understand that, I kind of feel like we need to go into the kind of the roots of the Mennonite faith denomination. So you can, when you understand that, you can maybe a little bit have a better background for understanding folks that you would work with, perhaps who are from that denomination. So I did bring one visual prop, simple ladle. That's it, a ladle. So you wouldn't think a ladle would be a worthy or even a dangerous symbol, but that's where the Mennonites found their roots in the Reformation movement in literally 500 years ago in January. There were what were called the radical reformers, or the name given to them were the rebaptizers, also known as the Anabaptists. Which literally means rebaptizer. So 500 years ago in Europe, there was a lot of Reformation rumblings, beginning with Martin Luther, and they marked their beginning in 1517 with posting his grievances as a priest in the Catholic Church, things he wanted to see reformed, and that's where he became the originator of the Lutheran faith. About this same time, the Anabaptists, also again radical reformers as they were called, were talking amongst themselves and reading the Bible, and this was time of a lot of cultural shifts and changes. You had the invention, of course, of the printing press, the availability of literature and literacy and reading the Bible, and then studying it. People were starting to study it for themselves, and there was a lot of need for reform in the Catholic Church at that time. A lot of things people were unsettled about. You had the Renaissance, you had the beginnings of the Enlightenment. All these things were happening at this time. And as these radical reformers were talking and reading the Bible amongst themselves, they said, we don't think it's right that we think following Jesus is a choice, not an adult choice. And we think baptism as a symbol of that choice is something adults can make, children can't. So we were talking about this, and at one point in this room where they were meeting in Zurich, one of the leaders, George Plowrock, grabs the ladle and a basin and says to his other radical reformer, Conrad Grebel, he says, "Well, doggone it, I'm just going to kneel here, baptize me." And so he did, and everybody's looking around. Can we do that? Is that no? So that's where it begins. It begins with that simple act of of the Reformation, because even the Lutherans and the Zwinglians, Zwingli was another reformer, had arguments for infant baptism. But why would that be dangerous? Well, at that time, if you were born in the European provinces and states, you were automatically assumed to be a Christian and a follower of Jesus. And so if you have adults choosing their faith, to follow in the faith or not, that can upset the whole structure of the society. What next, So it was actually a declaration of separation of church and state, which was, the implications of that were pretty significant to the powers that be. The Anabaptists were saying, well, the kingdom of the world, with its concern for wealth and armies and property and territory and raw power, run contradictory to the values of the faith that Jesus taught of love, forgiveness, nonviolence, sharing, those kind of things. So they saw a kind of a two worlds view, kingdom of the world and the kingdom of God that Jesus preached. So, and they're saying, as an adult, you come to a point where if you want to be a Christian and follow Jesus, that's your choice, and it's symbolized with this baptism, and it has a different set of values than the values of the state. So that got them in trouble. The Inquisition would collect and try these heretics and drown, burn, or banished or imprisoned, all kinds of ways of suppressing movements. We see that today in various ways too, not necessarily, thank God, in this country at this point, but it was also a time of peasant uprisings. There were the peasant wars, time when, again, there was a lot of social change on the horizon. Now, the Mennonites carry a strong connection to affinity with martyrdom. Like I said, the early first 100 years of the Anabaptist movement were they were not well received, and so were banished, went into the countryside, or were killed. Now, about this time, you have spin-offs. You have we know about the Amish, right? The Amish came out of the Anabaptist movement. Jacob Ammon was the leader, and thus the name Amish from Jacob Ammon. Felt that the Mennonites were they were doing a little too well, maybe getting too connected into the larger society. And so even today, you see how the Amish, even though we don't have too many Amish around here, but as a group, particularly over in Pennsylvania and so forth, they stay to themselves. They keep to their low level of technology and see themselves as separate from the larger society. Then you also had the Hutterites. The Hutterites came out of the Anabaptist tradition too. Jacob Hutter was the leader of that group. And as he was reading and they were reading the scriptures, they thought, the early church shared everything in common. So I think that's the lifestyle of a righteous community. So today we have Hutterite communities around here, a number of colonies over east of Spokane. Deep Creek is when I've gone out and visited, they love to show their place, and they do live in sort of dorm type or small units, apartments, not unsimilar to some of the units you see around here,
So
retirement centers.
They live in apartment units.
Yeah. Some of them do. Yeah, a lot of them do. So they live on the same grounds together and communally eat in the kitchen and fix, and they're very agricultural, and they are high technology. They have the best tractors and the best farmland around. And so unlike the Amish, they know how to do technology. And I appreciate any questions and conversation. Conversational is a good way to go as far as I'm concerned. I went and did a project with some called Mennonite Disaster Service, which goes out and rebuilds homes where there's been disasters. The Amish cooperate with the Mennonites in some of these endeavors. And the fellow that was leading that group was from the Amish, and I was just amazed. Like, he knew how to use his cell phone. He knew how to use power tools. It's like, whoa, you just blew my stereotype of the Amish, But so it's not that they don't know this stuff. It's that they circumscribe it. In certain contexts, it's okay, and in other contexts, it's not. I think one of the filters they tend to look through is, does this technology enhance our community and our connection to one another and keep us together, or does it scatter us and just integrate us into the larger, what is seen as fallen world of others, so forth. So I think that's, like I say, I learned that it's not that they're ignorant of technology, it's that they scrutinize it quite closely. And again, the Hutterites, different matter. Technology is not a problem. Their thing is communal living. So you have all kinds of Anabaptist groups. I'm a part of Mennonite Church USA, which is the larger of the Mennonite denominations in America. But then up north near Bonners Ferry, you have the Holdeman Mennonites. You have conservative Mennonites. You have Beachy Amish. You have, I looked it up. There's like probably 30, 40 different spin-off factions within the Mennonite umbrella. So not all, anywhere from this spectrum of very indistinguishable, for the most part, from the Amish, horse and buggy, bonnets and distinctive dress and so forth, to more mainline integrated denominational people like myself. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more too about why I'm in this particular denomination, but for now, that can come later. There's something called the Mennonite game. The Mennonite game. It's tongue in cheek, but and maybe I'm sure other groups do this too. But I might say at a gathering, "Hi, I'm Gary Jewell," and somebody might say, Jewell. That's not a Mennonite name, is it? So there's names you will come across that have some kind of connection or roots to the Anabaptist world, and those names might be Yoder, very common one, maybe not so much around here. Burkholder, Bontrager, Smucker, Erb, Cressman, Miller, Schmucker, Schwarzendruber, Kaufman, Taves. I was just trying to recall all the people. Stutzman, Clausen, Eshelman, Brenneman, Detweiler, Friesen, Eby, Gehrig, Jantz, Lehman, Lichty, Roth, Showalter, Schrock, Schenk, just to name a few. So I don't fit into any of those. So, but if you're gonna play, if you have one of those names, somebody will go, "Oh, do you know my relatives in Iowa who, you know?" So the basics of Mennonite theology, Hutterites and Amish included, in this Anabaptist world too, would be, I think, a two kingdoms understanding, which I touched upon earlier, the kingdom of God and the kingdom of the world, representing two different values systems. So it's important to be mindful of that. In the world, but not of the world kind of idea. The basic theology, I would say, is boilerplate Protestant in many respects, saved by Christ, sacrifice on the cross, personal choice of accepting Christ into your life as a follower. The idea of biblical authority that the Bible has is the authoritative text for figuring out how to live life. Things like the virgin birth, literal resurrection, forgiveness of others as God has forgiven us, a sense of judgment in the next life, and that's relevant, particularly for hospice, but saved by Christ or God's grace. There is a respect for the authority of the state, but only as far as it is not in direct contradiction with Christ's law of love. There is a strong component of love of enemy and pacifism. So these are some of the distinctive values. Now, recently, Mennonites have been influenced by the rise of fundamentalism in the past 100 years. Technology, sorry. Not surprisingly, Mennonites tend to vote, if they do vote, and some do, some don't, they vote conservative. In World War II, when World War I came around, they didn't have a conscientious objector status for pacifistic groups such as Quakers and the Mennonites. But that was changed, and when World War II came around, they did have a CO, conscientious objector status, that allowed Mennonite men, if they chose, to do non-related, non-war type service. And so those that chose to not be drafted or join the military were sent to work in mental health facilities, and thus they did in many ways became pioneers in mental health services as a result. Some joined forest fire fighting or the CCC type work camps. Some, however, did join the military, and in some ways that affected. They may have left the Mennonite church as a result of that when they came back because they felt judged or just didn't agree anymore with the pacifist understanding. So, or some just went back into the church, and the church some of those churches have had a live and let live individual choice attitude, and some of them lost that fervor for nonviolent distinctives. Mennonites were very involved in the Vietnam War resistance and draft counseling back in the 60s, 70s. Things to be aware of, I think of when helping Mennonites with death and dying. One, again, would be that theology that one finds salvation in the next life through faith in Christ. How one lives life doesn't save one. Mennonites are accused of works righteousness, but in fact, works are a natural outcome of the faith. And some of those tangible representations would be values of simplicity, church membership, and attendance. A value for preference for nonviolence as possible, high value for prayer, basic honesty. None of these things are exclusive to the Mennonites, but those are strong values. There is a belief in afterlife and heaven. It's assumed, I suppose. There is a sense of judgment or accountability that we will all face some kind of reckoning for what we've done, and there's a great comfort in knowing that Christ, I believe, is sort of an advocate in the next life and on our behalf, that we're saved by grace. Let's see, a sense that maybe Christ will return someday on this earth. That's not an uncommon Christian belief. When Mennonites minister to someone in the hospital, in a hospital stay or sickness or hospice situation, how might that manifest? I don't know. Y'all probably have some experiences and we can share. But my sense is people might come visit in groups and gather around for prayer. There'll be conversations, maybe reading of scripture, devotional readings. It's not uncommon to gather and sing hymns in the hospital room. A cappella and 4-part harmony are big art forms in the Mennonite world. Now, before and after death, particularly after death, hands-on and practical things are important, such as I've heard of the community, the church making the wooden coffin together. Sharing of meals, of course, that's almost universal. Maybe making a special quilt, usually before death, or maybe after. Digging, filling in the grave, these kind of things. Something that, it seems like in a hospice or hospital situation, people are looking for some concrete way to find solidarity and solace together. And I think these things.
Maybe just going back really quick to kind of the mentality and the belief structure around grace and works and those things. Is it common practice with the Mennonites to have any kind of like repentance or restitution or something that they work with their clergy as they're approaching end of life, or is that really individualized? Is it something? And I just ask because sometimes we're helping these people with existential crises at the end of life. You know? And so our chaplains, a lot of what their work is helping them with wherever they're at in their spiritual journey. And if that's something that's a common thing with members of the Mennonite faith, it's good for us to kind of know too.
Yeah. You mean, so letting go of these burdens of regret, perhaps, or things like that.
But are there things like with certain faiths, there's last rites or things of that nature, or confessionals or things like that? Is there anything like that that's common practice with the Mennonites?
I don't know if we have a ritual of certainly don't have one of like the Catholics of last rites, but in a more informal way, are you at peace with God? And are there things we need to, set right, or you would like to let go of Those are, again, those are universal kind of conversations I suppose you would have, but they're certainly relevant
Sure.
to the human experience.
And if anything were to come up, say, as we're in these people's homes, we're talking with them, and some of that comes into the conversation, it'd be as simple as maybe reaching out to whoever the pastor is of their denomination where they live,
Yeah,
and just saying, hey, you might want to come visit, with their permission, of course.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I think a high level of, again, it's all depends on the individual and what kind of backstory they're carrying, but and the relationship they may have with their clergy, but to have the elders or the pastor come, absolutely, and I would imagine most pastors would want that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you should definitely invite that if they're a little shy about that.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Like I say, I think community support in conjunction with a strong theology of forgiveness is a very important aspect in Mennonite faith and lifestyle. And these two aspects help to bolster the ability to forgive. That is, community support and a theology that supports forgiveness, letting go. I think of three stories. One is, I don't know if you remember, you've been around here long enough or not, but Deer Park Mennonite family was traveling into Spokane a number of years ago. It was a dad coming to meet up with the mom, and the mom was pregnant or had a small child. She was at the mall or somewhere, and he was coming in from Deer Park with their 4 kids. And another person came in the opposite direction, had driven through on the median strip first for a number of yards before swerving into their car, killing all 4 kids. And I remember I went to the funeral. I didn't know them, but I just felt moved to go to their service. And it was held at a church, a more evangelical church, a larger facility that could accommodate it in the north end of town. And some Mennonite groups from all over the Northwest showed up. So the place was packed, and the dad was there in a wheelchair with a neck brace on. And sitting with him was his wife, and laid out 4 coffins out front, in the front. But they publicly forgave this man who survived, who had swerved into their car. And nobody knows what the real story is or what was going on. But there was definitely a sense of forgiveness for this horrendous loss. And moving forward, and I don't know what makes that possible, but it happens. The West Nickel Mines Amish School in Pennsylvania, 10 Amish kids were shot and murdered by an outsider who then killed himself. And again, the community families issued a public statement of forgiveness for the perpetrator and for holding no ill will against his family. So these kind of things are, again, none of this is exclusive to any one group, but it seems to be, it's an admirable and wondrous thing to be able to do that. And it angered some people. It's like, how can you forgive them? So I get that too. But there's a story in the canon of martyrdom, going back to the early Anabaptist thing. There's a book about this thick. It's called The Martyr's Mirror. And it has maybe 1,000 stories of accounts of martyrdom with verbatims during the Inquisition from records. And it's a fascinating read. Goes all the way from Jesus all the way to the 1600s or so. And one of the stories is of a fellow named Dirk Willems. in the Netherlands, he was being during this Reformation period, he was being chased. He'd escaped from jail, was being chased across a frozen pond or lake, and his pursuer, his jailer, broke through the ice. And Dirk stops and he looks back. He could get away, or he could help this guy. He turns around, he helps this guy get out of the water, and then is promptly captured and retried and hung. So, yeah. But Dirk Willems is held up as sort of one of the saints of Anabaptism, because that just tells you this interest in that kind of radical discipleship that would is selflessness. Now, my personal view of afterlife and judgment and salvation do not necessarily represent the majority of Mennonite views. My views might be seen as liberal in some ways, whatever that word means. It's important that every individual has their own, I think, unique speculations, beliefs, and questions about death and the afterlife. They may keep these thoughts very private in Mennonite circles for fear of being outside the group's conformity to orthodoxy. There is an impulse for conformity because they have this strong group, collective, sectarian, if you will, understanding of living their life. So to step outside the bounds and risk ostracism or judgment is a little bit scary. So, but every one of us, I think, carries our own questions and wonders. And we think outside the box, but we may not. Speak of it freely.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Here. You talked about, community coming together and making coffins together and stuff. So is there a thought about cremation, being buried?
Ooh.
What are?
Yeah, well, if it's Mennonite Church USA, probably that would be an individual choice. That's a super good question. I can tell you, I have a hunch.
Hunch works.
Would in the ground burial would be keeping the body intact. Some might believe in a literal bodily resurrection of some sort, which doesn't comport really with decomposition issues and so forth. But some of the churches, the older churches, have their own cemeteries on their church property. So, because they are more of a rural oriented people, a lot of farming and carpentry and those kind of skills are valued. It's interesting. The Anabaptist movement began as an urban movement in the cities of Europe, but became a rural, more of a rural grouping, in part because of persecutions and being, separate. It's easier to be separate and non-influenced by the larger world if you're out in the country. And that persists today to some degree. I remember when I was doing my internship in Kitchener, Ontario, and I was sent to go speak and visit with an older fellow named Enos, who was facing his last days. And he had the longest struggle with forgiving deep family betrayal. He was stabbed in the back, according to him, by his brother, and swindled out of the farm or something. I don't know exactly remember the issue, but I remember talking with him quite a bit about how he could let go of this and so forth, not be carrying it. When I think back, I didn't validate his feelings. I feel like I didn't say, you have every right to feel this and to be, I'm sorry you're carrying it, but I totally get it, I mean, I think that's a big healing thing to feel like somebody kind of gets it, like you're not crazy. So anyway, helping people let go of their burdens at the end of life is a big task, I assume, of hospice if the person so wants that.
The power of empathy, right?
Yeah.
So Gary, with that, and because what you're describing with the Mennonites and then of the subgroups, the Amish and the Hutters, there's this. It sounds like a very strong sense of community, and my assumption then is there's probably a lot of involvement in the care of individuals as they approach end of life by either family or neighbors or friends or other members of the faith, and that as that person then passes away, is it encouraged? Like, are we as hospice caregivers, is it something that we should reach out to family to ask them if they want to participate or even do all of the cleaning of the body, changing their clothes, helping to prepare them? And are funeral homes often employed to help take care of the deceased, or does the community take care of that for them?
Okay. I would think that would be a welcome invitation. As to burial protocols and legal things, can we in Washington bury
In Idaho, you don't have to utilize a funeral home.
I said Washington.
Yeah, but we know like what resources we have to go to through the health department to get the proper permits into the hands of the people that are looking to say bury on their own property or transport a body somewhere. So we know those pieces. Do you guys see that being utilized ever in your congregations, or is it more commonplace to use funeral homes?
Yeah, I think it's more common to use funeral homes in my circles.
Yeah.
But in, like I say, if you're dealing with the Holdemans or some of these other groups, I'm honestly not sure what their tradition is, but I wouldn't be surprised that would be a something they would participate in, some kind of hands-on way of whether it's building the coffin or digging the grave or washing the body, or gathering the community around for prayers, the body's taken away from the hospital, or any of those things would be highly valued, and certainly wouldn't hesitate to invite that, ask them about that.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the gentleman that you helped who's more estranged. So if you're supporting a Mennonite end of life who for some reason doesn't have family there, would there be any hymns or readings or prayers in particular that might be seen as traditional or more supportive and have that help connect to help get them ready for end of life?
Well, all the oldies but goodies, Psalm 23 and so forth, but I use Romans 8 a lot because it assures us that nothing can separate us from the love of God. And I mean, if nothing, it says nothing. Does it? Do you believe? I mean, people don't hear it, but they may hear it, but they may not really believe it. So I think it's to help them let go. There's a anthem of sorts in the Mennonite church used to be called 606 because that was the number it had in the hymnal. And then we made a new hymnal and it was a different number, but some of the older folks still remember 606, and we always sing that as praise God. But it's not, it's, it's the same words as praise God from whom all blessings flow, but it's a way different tune. And it's just this kind of anthem that a lot of Mennonites sing. But there's, great is thy faithfulness, all those, they're familiar with the old hymns a lot. So if you have some of those in your brain, but of course ask they're hymns that nurture your soul, that, and get yourself one of the hymnals. I don't know if you have a library with some of the Lutherans or the Mennonites or the whoever's hymns, because those, the music, as you know, is the power of that is crazy. It's beautiful. It stays in your memory, right? Yeah. I'm sure you all have your own amazing stories of people you've ministered or served as nurses or social workers or chaplains, things that you can't explain, or things that were just beautiful, or things that disturbing, I don't know. But yeah.
A little bit of all that.
Yeah, no, I think you're in a pretty cool profession. Intense but beautiful.
Gary, I've got another question. If that's but when you're finished.
No.
Well, I'm just curious, because we are, a medical provider, medical practitioners. A big part of our practice is helping to manage symptoms as people approach end of life, and a significant amount of that is medicinally. So using what otherwise are controlled substances, so opiates to manage pain, benzodiazepines to manage anxiety, other of these types of medications that are pretty potent, but are appropriately used in the context of symptom management at end of life. Are there any kind of cultural or traditional aversions generally within the Mennonite faith to the use of those kind of medications, narcotics and things like that? Or is it more an individualized thing, or even, hey, if it's being prescribed by a medical practitioner that has appropriate training and understanding of these drugs and is educating properly, that it's totally okay?
I think that last part, I would go with that. I think it's somewhat individual. I think to relieve the suffering, it would be affirmed by the family or whoever. But I think as long as you educate, particularly, it's like, and consult.
Would any of the more fundamentalist groups be just not wanting any of those medications? I mean, is there a difference between more fundamentalists or conservative versus?
That's such a good question. I'm sorry I couldn't say. I think I speculate the common impulse to relieve the pain and suffering is common to everyone. And they want their loved one to not be in this unbearable pain that sometimes accompanies things like cancer, right? Again, all you can do is certainly ask the individual, or if they're not.
And ask the family.
Yeah. And again, assure them that this isn't addictive, or maybe the concern being this is sinful to do, or something like that.
That's what I don't know.
Yeah.
Because one thing we do see in some practices, religious practices, is a correlation of suffering at end of life and that relationship to sin and to the mortal state and things like that. And so for some people, there's that they actually believe that it's part of their journey is to suffer as they approach end of life.
As
And so-
Christ did.
Yeah, and so and that's why we like asking these kind of questions, particularly in the context of Christianity, is because we do have some different sects in our community that do have that practice as a principle as they approach end of life. That's why we're curious with that.
Yeah.
question.
No, I mean, gosh, I mean, and you have to respect that, right?
Yeah, we
And
do.
it's like, okay, but let me know if you change your mind.
But so generally in the denominations where you practice with the Mennonites, that's not a cultural consideration or anything. Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of that being an issue.
Okay.
I mean, I think people understand that it's a big difference between palliative care and abuse of heroin, or and drug abuse does happen in the Mennonite world. I mean, especially alcohol. It's more shameful and under the radar, because you don't want to be, again, that cultural shaming thing is pretty strong, but it happens. You might be dealing with people who've been banned or shunned, or maybe not officially, but left some of the more sectarian groups. If you sort of step out of the norms, then you're in this other kingdom, not of the church kingdom, if you will. And at the end of life, their reconciliation stuff with family or stuff maybe come up. I left the church because they, I couldn't go along with it, or they felt like I was, whatever. And in some families, they accept that person and their choice, and in other families, in really strict groups, you're not supposed to talk to them anymore. But that would be pretty extreme.
Yeah, in some of the more extreme, more orthodox
shunning and banning doesn't happen as much, but it's harsh.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you talked about sort of having those individual beliefs, and clearly we all have, our own personal beliefs, but according to the teachings, you talk about the two, the kingdom here on earth and the kingdom, what would the kingdom of God look like for the afterlife? Is that a pretty traditional Christian view?
Yeah, I think so. Being in the direct presence of God, and no more suffering, and those kind of beautiful sense of things. There's nothing weird, or shall I say weird? No, it's not. That's super judgmental. It's nothing outside the norm, like some groups, like the LDS might have a more, I don't know LDS theology very well, but they have very specific ways of understanding afterlife and so forth. And Mennonites are pretty traditional in that, somewhat. Not highly speculative about the specifics, just that they want to go be with their Savior, be with God. My own, I have been fascinated personally with near NDEs and stories and so forth, and just the consistency of them, and they fascinate me. There's a fellow named Sam Parnia. Sam Parnia, that's it. He's a doctor at New York University, a pulmonologist and a researcher in resuscitation techniques, and has studied a lot of people who come back from presumably being dead or near dead, And this was what fascinated. He says they have a sense, a lot of people have a sense of visualizing things almost in 360 degrees. They say, my life flashed before my eyes is an understatement and does not accurately describe the experience. Those who have brushed death describe not only reliving every interaction they've had with others, but also from the perspectives of the people they were interacting with. This hyper lucid experience of death, they describe being able to recall all their intentions, thoughts, and every single emotional state they've been in. They do not simply experience random flashes of memories, but instead evaluate the interactions they've had with various people through a moral and ethical lens, independent of their belief structures beforehand. I thought, that is fascinating and frightening. So, I have to experience how other people experienced me. Yeah. Now, this is all presumably for our good and learning, if this is God's an all-loving God, but to come face to face with the truth of our existence in the way that we can't see now is just a fascinating thing in my brain.
Makes you want to play nice.
Yeah, exactly.
So since we're talking about it, I heard a different one where this guy was enveloped in unconditional love and was walked through his life, and he said he was not a good person. So he felt the pain that he caused. So if I hurt you, it also hurts your family, and then the ripple out effect. But since we're not all good and we're not all bad, he also felt the good that he did and the ripple out effect. And then they sent him back. And so you've got to go back now. And so I'm like, I like that kind of version too of judgment. You know, I'm being held in unconditional love and being judged.
But I don't get to escape.
Yeah, I don't get to escape the pain that I caused or the good that I caused.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To see the full picture. We just, I mean, that, to me, that's as particularly as we all are getting closer and closer, younger or older. Every day we're a little closer to that day. And I'm 66. I had a hospital experience 10 years ago where I lost, as a result, lost part of this leg. It was a prosthetic. And it was heart surgery that didn't go well. And I was right on the edge of life and death. They went back in the second time and redid the hemorrhaging that was happening. And then the organ failure happened and the liver was shutting down and everything. And I was like, I don't think he's going to make it. But so I did. I don't know if it was a combination of prayer and medicine or just the medicine or just the prayers. But anyway, I got another lease on life, and it does change your perspective. It does change his mind. I didn't have any, in the unconscious state, any, those beautiful epiphanies, but I did change perspective for sure, in a good way. Yeah. So who else chaplains?
Just me.
Just you? And what, social workers?
Guess not.
Social workers here today? Not today.
No, not today.
Nurses? A lot of nurses. Pardon?
Administration.
Administration? Okay, all right.
And a nurse.
Then you have, what?
And a nurse.
Oh,
So-
nice. Well, that's a bonus. Yeah. And then you work with a lot of volunteers.
Lots.
Yeah. Very rewarding.
I guess that's a question then too. And I totally understand that you kind of have the perspective of your congregation, your denomination, your group, and so it's hard to speak for the Mennonite faith in general. But are you aware of any sense of privacy or of intrusion into somebody's personal space that might be more generalized with members of the faith that would be good for us to be aware of, including, because it's one thing to have say a nurse go in to provide, physical cares. And another thing entirely from that too, to have a chaplain go in and speak about, just spirituality in general and, desires and loss and those pieces. But then even to the extent of having like volunteers coming into the home that are coming in to do companionship, is there one way or the other, either like more of a general desire with people of your faith that you've noticed to have more of that kind of presence, or maybe less, or is it just kind of a mix of everything in between?
Probably about a mix. I don't know. Yeah. Do you have a specific situation that you've kind
Well,
of
it varies
wrestled with?
from person to person, but we'll sometimes go in to start providing hospice care for someone, and it's usually a nurse that's the one that's kind of initiating that care.
Yeah.
And at that conversation, we're asking questions about, we've got this service, we can have an aide come in to help you with baths. We've got a social worker that'll be coming in every couple of weeks to talk to you about, your psychosocial needs and resources and things like that. We have a chaplain that can come in and help talk you through, what your priorities are, what's important to you at end of life. What does spirituality look like to you, and how can we help to support that?
Yeah.
And so we kind of introduce the team at that first visit. And sometimes some people, depending on their background, will just be like, no, I only want a nurse, maybe a social worker, and an aide. And so sometimes there's aversion to different people from different backgrounds. And we can't always pinpoint it to say like one cultural or faith-based belief, but if there is, it's good for us to know that going into a conversation.
Yeah. Some people may just want to talk to somebody they have a known and long-term relationship with, like their pastor, presumably, or maybe they would, it's so individual, maybe they would prefer to talk to somebody not of their community, the hospice chaplain. I don't know. Such a great variety of responses that you could get. What I find awkward in my work ministry is if somebody's sick and clearly not looking like, well, they're certainly, they haven't declared hospice, but you're thinking in your brain, I don't know if you're going to live very long. How do you bring that up? Because you already, if somebody is in hospice, it's already assumed explicitly that you're at the end of your life and you're going to die. So you have an open door to that conversation.
Yeah.
As for my situation, sometimes it's a little harder to get into
That's
that
a hard
door.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ask the question anyway.
Yeah.
What's that?
Ask the question anyway.
What is the question?
What are your thoughts on death and dying? You're really sick right now. How do you feel? Do you, even bringing it to do you feel like you're at end of life?
Yeah.
And what's coming up for you?
Just leave it kind of open-ended questions, but yeah.
Sometimes even asking, and this is more like on a clinical side, but even asking a family member that's there present with their loved one, would you be surprised if they died in the next 12 months?
Or even 6.
Or even 6. Yeah, would you be surprised?
And
And that sometimes can kind of kickstart a conversation.
yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that question.
And as a hospice for us, like just as we love having you come in and educate us, this is something that we also offer out to the community, is going out to help educate and reinforce conversation techniques and education things with congregations or with congregation leaders as well. And so if that was something that ever you were like, hey, I could use some more information about that, just call us too.
That's the kind of thing I think clergy would appreciate.
Yeah.
How do you raise conversations of mortality, particularly when it's apparent that you're not pre-assuming that they're dying, but certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
how you bring that up and without, because are they waiting for you to bring it up? Or are you waiting for them to bring it up?
Maybe both.
Yeah.
I've made the statement in the past number of churches I've served that say, you want me to preach? I'm happy. I know that's part of my job. And I said, when I speak from the pulpit, you're probably going to hear three echoes of three things: mystery, meaning, and mortality. I said, what is the meaning of my life in light of the fact that I really don't know how I got here and I don't know when I'm leaving, all this mystery, but I know that my days are numbered. So how do I make meaning out of that? And so I weave mortality into the conversations in my ministry work, but
Gotcha.
yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So nothing's more personal and existential than facing our death, you know.
I was just wondering if there's any more questions, comments, concerns. Was there anything you wanted to talk about but didn't?
Can't
Okay.
I can't think of anything. I was just wondering about y'all's stories or experiences, but I know that there are probably too many to account. But do you notice? Is there any one common thread you see in the people you work with that, as they look down the barrel of the shortness of life?
Surprisingly little fear.
What's that?
Surprisingly little fear.
Yeah.
There's some, but
Yeah,
It's
but
not-
as a
it's not-
whole,
it's
the
not
way
like
society is, you think people would be trembling in their shoes. And
Uh-huh.
Especially as they get
they're
closer.
really not.
yeah.
I'd say that's a pretty universal thing.
So what did you just say?
Same as what she said, especially as they get closer,
Oh, okay.
imminent.
That's beautiful. That's good to
Yeah.
know.
More of an acceptance.
Yeah.
That they've accepted it and almost at peace with you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's nice to see them being so vulnerable, and there are a few that are very, standoffish and really keep us from doing a lot, but for the most part, they accept you into their home, you're in their most private, viewings with them, and they're very open.
Yeah.
And as far as like forgiveness goes, I work a lot with more self-forgiveness than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Forgiving of self versus forgiving of somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We beat ourselves up. Yeah. And knowing that, I would think, knowing that I don't want to carry that with me as I leave out the door
Right.
is a big concern. Yeah. Yeah, we're hardest on ourselves, for sure. Well, again, I think it's important to be honest, of course, about our lives and everything and the consequences of what we've done or haven't done, but equally to let it go, because we can't redo the past, and make amends if there's a possibility before we go, but assure people that what we've been professing in our faith, that God is love, and it's beyond anything we can understand. And that's where these NDE stories just bolster this reality that I hear, that the presence and peace and love of God is literally beyond understanding. And if you're an atheist, that's fine too. You can probably work with some people who have no belief system, and they don't. What the reality of whatever it is we're facing does not rise or fall on what we believe about it. It'll be what it is, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me here. I'm sorry I got a little flustered getting here.
It's okay.
Yeah, I hate being late. Yeah, God bless you in your work.
Well, thank you for joining us. And
Yeah.
next month we will have Professor Laura Templeton. I hope I'm saying her name right. Joining us to talk about atheism and nones, NONES. So thank you and have a great day.
Would you say that?